The garage door slammed shut in my face before I even reached the driveway. Not my garage. Not my door. But it was blocking the only way into my house. The smell of fresh asphalt and wet concrete hit me hard, thick in the morning air, like something had gone wrong overnight. I stood there for a second, keys still in my hand, staring at a structure that hadn't existed yesterday. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. Then it clicked. They had built it. Right over my driveway. I walked closer, boots grinding against loose gravel and dried cement dust. The edges were still rough. The lines were rushed. This wasn't an accident. That's when I noticed the angle. Subtle. Almost invisible. But wrong. The slope didn't match the natural runoff. Not even close. Someone either didn't check, or didn't care. I looked up and saw her watching me from across the yard. Victoria Hale. Coffee in hand. Perfect posture. That same polished smile she wore at every HOA meeting. Like she was already 3 steps ahead. "It's a community improvement," she called out, calm and practiced. Her voice carried across the concrete like it belonged there. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because something else felt off. I stepped to the side, crouched down, and ran my fingers along the seam where their foundation met the edge of my drive. Still warm. Still soft in places. They had poured this fast. Too fast. The kind of fast you use when you don't want anyone asking questions. I stood up slowly, scanning the structure again. One detail caught my eye. A small metal cap near the edge. Half buried. Almost hidden. Most people would miss it. I didn't. And that's when the pieces started lining up in my head. I glanced back at Victoria. She was still smiling. Waiting for me to react. Waiting for a fight. But I didn't give her one. Not a word. Not even a look. I just turned, walked back to my truck, and sat there for a second with the engine off. The silence felt heavy. Like the ground itself was holding something back. I looked at the driveway again. Or what used to be mine. They thought they had sealed it. Covered it. Claimed it. But they built it in the one place they never should have. Touched. And I knew something they didn't. I started the engine, slow, steady, and pulled away without another glance. Because right then, I realized, this wasn't going to end the way they expected. I did not buy this place for the view. I bought it for the access. 40 feet of clean, straight driveway leading from the county road to my garage. No shared entry. No HOA overlap. That detail was not optional. It was the reason I signed the papers. The realtor almost skipped over it. I made her go back. Twice. Because I have seen what happens when access is not clear. It starts small. Then it gets messy. Then it gets expensive. That never happens by accident. My name is Ethan Cole. I am a civil engineer. 15 years in infrastructure compliance and zoning review. I read land the way most people read contracts. Lines matter. Slopes matter. What is buried under the surface matters even more. That driveway was not just concrete. It was a legal path. Documented. Filed. Protected. I knew that before I ever moved in. The first time I drove up here, the gravel crunched just right under the tires. No echoes. No shared traffic. Just open space and a clean approach. That kind of quiet is rare. You do not get it inside a managed community. Not unless something has been carved out carefully. This one had been. The previous owner made sure of it. I found the original survey in the closing packet. Hand-stamped. County approved. The driveway sat on a recorded easement that ran straight through what used to be open land behind the houses. Most people would have ignored that line. It looked like a technical detail. It was not. It was the only reason this property worked. And someone had just poured a structure right across it. I pulled into a gas station about half a mile down the road. Killed the engine. The ticking sound under the hood filled the silence. Heat rising. Smell of oil and dust. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the folder I kept there. Not organized for show. Organized for moments like this. I flipped past the purchase agreement. Past the tax documents. Found the survey. There it was. Black line. Clean and straight. Running exactly where that garage now stood. No question. No ambiguity. I tapped the paper once with my finger. Just to be sure I was not seeing it wrong. I was not. But something still bothered me. That slope I saw earlier. It was not just bad construction. It was misaligned with something deeper. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes for a second. Visualizing the grade. The runoff. The buried systems. There was only one reason you would avoid matching natural drainage. You were covering something. Or ignoring it. Neither option ended well. I opened my eyes and looked back toward the road leading to my house. Quiet. Still. Like nothing had happened. That is how problems like this hide. Clean on the surface. Wrong underneath. I started the truck again and headed back. Slower this time. Watching the ground as I approached. The sunlight hit the fresh concrete at an angle. You could see the texture. The uneven finish. And there it was again. That small metal cap near the edge. Barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Most people would step right over it. I parked and walked up, stopping just short of the new slab. The air still carried that sharp cement smell. I crouched down again, closer this time. Brushed away a thin layer of dust with my hand. The metal edge came into view. Circular. Standard size. Not decorative. Functional. I did not need to open it to know what it was. I had installed systems like this before. Utility access. Possibly drainage. Possibly something older. Either way, it was not supposed to be sealed under a permanent structure. Not ever. I stood up slowly and looked at the garage again. Then at Victoria's house. Curtains shifted for just a second. She was watching. Waiting. She thought this was a boundary issue. A simple dispute. Something loud and short. Something she could control. But this was not about a boundary line anymore. This was about what they built over without checking what was already there. And that changed everything. I brushed the dust off my hands and stepped back from the slab, already thinking 3 moves ahead. I did not knock on her door. Not yet. That would have been too easy. Too expected. Victoria Hale did not win by reacting. She won by controlling the pace. And right now, she thought she had already said it. I stayed by the edge of the concrete and looked across her yard instead. Clean lines. Fresh landscaping. Everything staged to look intentional. Like that garage belonged there all along. But the details told a different story. The concrete color did not match the existing driveway on her side. Slightly darker. Still curing. Rushed. That kind of mismatch always leaves a trace. I stepped along the edge, slow and measured. Counting in my head. 1, 2, 3. The distance lined up almost exactly with the easement width. Not a coincidence. That meant one thing. They had seen the line. They just chose to ignore it. Or worse, they thought they could rewrite it. That idea never ends well. I stopped near the corner where the slab met the soil. There were fresh tire marks pressed into the dirt. Construction vehicles. Heavy ones. They had been in and out fast. No hesitation. No pause to verify anything below. That told me even more. Either the crew was misled, or they were told not to ask questions. Both options pointed back to the same person. I glanced up again. The curtain moved just a little. Still watching. Still waiting for a reaction. She expected noise. Anger. Maybe a phone call. Something she could shut down with a rulebook and a smile. But I gave her nothing. Silence is harder to control. I walked back to my truck and leaned against the door, arms crossed, studying the structure from a distance. The garage looked solid. Clean framing. Proper alignment on the surface. To anyone else, it was finished work. But the ground underneath told a different story. That slight slope again. It kept pulling my attention. Just enough to be wrong. Not enough for someone untrained to notice. That is where mistakes hide. In the space between obvious and invisible. I took out my phone and opened a mapping app one used for field checks. Nothing fancy. Just a way to overlay basic property lines and elevation hints. I lined it up with what I was seeing. The easement cut straight through the center of that garage. No shift. No bend. Direct conflict. But then I zoomed in a little more. There was a faint marking beneath the easement line. Something most people would skip right over. A utility notation. Old. Probably decades old. But still active on record. I felt a small shift in my chest. Not excitement. Not yet. Recognition. This was getting deeper than a boundary dispute. I lowered the phone slowly and looked back at the metal cap embedded near the slab. That was not random. That was access. And access means something is still in use. I walked over again, slower this time. The air felt heavier. Even the silence had weight now. I crouched and tapped the metal lightly with my knuckle. Hollow sound. Not decorative. Definitely functional. I traced the edge with my finger. No sealant. No proper clearance. They poured right over the surrounding space without adjusting for it. That is not just sloppy. That is a violation waiting to surface. I stood up and wiped my hands clean. Then I finally turned toward her house and took a few steps in that direction. Not to confront. Just to be seen moving. The front door opened before I even reached the walkway. Perfect timing. Of course. Victoria stepped out, still holding that coffee mug, still composed. "You seem interested," she said, like this was a casual conversation. I nodded once. "I am." That was all I gave her. Nothing more. Her smile tightened just a little. Barely noticeable. But it was there. She expected resistance. She got curiosity instead. That unsettled her more than anything I could have said. She took a small step forward. "It is already approved," she added, voice smooth, rehearsed. That word hung in the air. Approved. That was the first real clue she offered without realizing it. Approved by who? Based on what? And more importantly, without checking what was already under that concrete. I held her gaze for a second longer, then turned back toward the garage without answering. Because now I knew where to look next. I drove straight to the county records office instead of going back inside. The building smelled like old paper and recycled air, the kind of place where mistakes sit quietly for years before anyone notices. I signed in, nodded to the clerk, and headed for the public terminals. No rush. No noise. Just time to verify one word she should not have used. Approved. I pulled up the parcel map first. Clean grid. Familiar layout. My property line. Her property line. And right between them, that narrow strip marked as a recorded access easement. Still active. Still untouched on file. No amendments. No transfers. That alone was enough to raise questions. But it was not the part that mattered most. I clicked deeper into the permit database and entered her address. It took a second. Then the file loaded. Garage addition. Recently submitted. Recently approved. That part matched what she said. But something felt off. I opened the attached documents one by one. Basic plans. Simple framing. Nothing unusual on the surface. Then I noticed what was missing. No subsurface report. No utility clearance documentation. Not even a standard note about existing access rights. That is not how approvals are supposed to work. Not if they are done correctly. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the screen. Either someone skipped steps, or someone was never told the full picture. Both options pointed to a weak approval. And weak approvals do not hold under pressure. I printed the permit summary and folded it neatly. Then I went back to the parcel map and zoomed in again. There it was. That faint utility notation I saw earlier. I clicked on it this time. The description opened in a separate tab. Stormwater drainage access. Installed decades ago. Maintained under county oversight. Active status. My fingers paused on the mouse for a second. That changed everything. You do not build permanent structures over active drainage systems. Not legally. Not safely. Not without a full redesign and special clearance. And even then, it rarely gets approved. I printed that file too. The printer hummed behind me, steady and calm, like it had seen this before. I gathered the pages and tapped them into a clean stack. Paper does not lie. Not when it is recorded correctly. I walked back to the counter and asked a simple question. Was a drainage clearance filed with this permit? The clerk looked at me, then at the screen. Clicked a few times. Shook her head. I do not see one. Her tone was neutral. Routine. But that answer carried weight. I thanked her and stepped outside into the sunlight. The air felt different now. Clearer. Sharper. Like the picture had finally come into focus. I got back in my truck but did not start it right away. I just sat there, looking at the papers in my hand. Garage approval without utility clearance. Structure built over an active easement. Drainage access sealed under fresh concrete. None of that aligns. Not in any system that actually works. I exhaled slowly and started the engine. The drive back felt shorter this time. Not because the road changed. Because the situation had. When I pulled up, the garage looked the same. Solid. Confident. Like it belonged. But I could see the fault lines now. Invisible to everyone else. Obvious to me. Victoria's car was parked out front. The engine still warm. She had not gone far. That meant she was still watching. Still waiting to see what I would do next. I stepped out and walked toward the slab again, slower than before. The sunlight hit the metal cap just right. A small glint. Easy to miss if you were not looking. I stopped a few feet away and just stood there for a moment. Listening. The faint sound of water moving somewhere below. Quiet. Steady. Still active. That was all I needed to hear. I glanced toward her house one more time. No movement now. Just stillness behind the windows. She thought this was finished. Locked in. Untouchable. But she built on something that cannot be ignored for long. And systems like that do not stay quiet forever. They push back. I folded the papers once and slipped them into my jacket pocket, already thinking about the next step. I knocked once. Solid. Controlled. The kind of knock that does not ask permission. The door opened almost immediately. Victoria did not look surprised. She looked ready. That same polished expression. That same calm tone. Back already, she said, like this was routine. I held up the folded papers but did not hand them over. I checked your permit, I said. Her smile did not move. Not even a fraction. That told me she expected this part. Everything is approved, she replied, smooth and confident. I nodded slowly. Let the silence sit for a second. Then I added, not everything. That landed differently. Just enough to register. But she recovered fast. If you have a concern, you can file it through the association, she said. Scripted. Practiced. She was trying to move this into her system. Into her control. I shook my head once. This is not an association issue. That was the first real shift. Small. But visible. Her fingers tightened slightly around the coffee mug. Barely noticeable. But it was there. I stepped to the side just enough so she could see the garage from where we stood. You built over an active drainage access, I said. No emotion. Just fact. The words hung between us for a second. She blinked once. That was it. Then the smile came back. That is not what the permit says. She was leaning on the paper. On the approval stamp. People trust stamps. They should not. I unfolded the document slowly, letting the pages catch the light. The permit does not mention it, I said. That is the problem. She did not respond right away this time. Just a slight pause. A recalculation. Then she stepped forward onto the porch, closing the distance a little. We followed every requirement, she said. Her voice was still calm, but the edge was starting to show. That edge always shows when control starts slipping. I nodded again, calm, steady. Then whoever reviewed it did not check the utility records. That was the first real crack. Not visible to most people. But I saw it. Her eyes shifted for just a second. Quick. Subtle. Enough. She did not know. Not fully. She had pushed this through assuming the surface was all that mattered. That assumption was about to cost her. Look, she said, adjusting her tone, softening it just a little. We are improving the property values here. This benefits everyone. That word again. Everyone. It never includes the person being pushed out. I glanced back at the garage. Clean lines. Fresh paint. Still curing underneath. You blocked my only access, I said. Simple. Direct. No room to redirect that. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled through her nose. Controlled. Measured. Temporary inconvenience, she replied. We can discuss shared usage terms. There it was. The pivot. From control to negotiation. Too early. That told me she felt the pressure building. But she still thought it was a boundary issue. A matter of agreements. Not systems. Not infrastructure. She was playing the wrong game. I folded the papers again and slipped them back into my jacket. No need to push further. Not yet. You should have checked what was under that slab, I said quietly. Not a threat. Not a warning. Just a statement. She held my gaze this time. Longer. Trying to read something. Trying to find leverage. But there was nothing to grab onto. No anger. No urgency. Just certainty. That unsettles people more than anything else. If there is a problem, she said, a little sharper now, we will handle it. I nodded once. You will. Then I stepped back from the porch and turned toward the driveway. Or what used to be mine. The air felt still again. Quiet. Like everything was waiting for the next move. I could feel her watching me as I walked away. Not relaxed anymore. Not fully confident. Something had shifted. Just enough. I reached the edge of the concrete and paused for a second, looking down at that small metal cap again. It caught the sunlight for just a moment. A tiny reflection. Easy to ignore. Until it is not. I did not look back this time. Because now it was not about convincing her. It was about letting the system catch up to what she built over. And systems like that do not move fast. But when they do not miss. The next morning, the garage door was open. Wide. Like nothing had happened. Fresh tire marks cut across the concrete, dark against the pale surface. They were already using it. Of course they were. I stood at the edge of the road for a second, watching from a distance. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the slab. That slope looked even more obvious now. Still subtle. Still wrong. I walked closer, slow, measured, boots brushing against loose gravel at the edge. The air carried a faint damp smell this time. Not just concrete. Something underneath. That caught my attention. I stopped near the corner and listened. Quiet. Then a faint, hollow echo under the slab. Not loud. Just enough. That system was still active. I glanced up. Victoria's car was gone. Garage empty for now. That gave me a window. I stepped closer to the metal cap and crouched down again. Same position. Same angle. But now there was moisture around the edges. Thin. Barely visible. But it should not be there on a dry morning. Not unless something was backing up. I ran my fingers along the seam. Cool. Damp. The concrete above it was still curing, still sealing things it should not seal. That pressure had nowhere to go. Not anymore. I stood up slowly, scanning the slab again. That slight misalignment was doing more than just looking wrong. It was forcing water toward a blocked point. That never stays stable. I took a step back and looked at the entire structure from the road. Clean lines on the surface. Hidden stress underneath. That is how failure begins. Quiet. Unseen. I pulled out my phone and took a few photos. Wide shots. Close angles. Nothing dramatic. Just evidence. I did not need much. The system would do the rest. A car turned into the driveway behind me. I stepped aside as a neighbor rolled down the window. Mid-50s. Curious expression. That new build looks tight, he said, nodding toward the garage. I gave a small nod. It is new. He glanced at the slab, then back at me. They moved fast. I let that sit for a second. Then said, too fast. He frowned slightly, like he sensed something off but could not place it. That is how it always starts. People notice. They just do not understand why yet. He drove off, tires crunching over gravel, leaving the quiet behind again. I looked back at the slab. That damp edge was spreading. Slowly. Not enough for anyone else to see. But enough for me. I checked the forecast on my phone. Clear skies. No rain scheduled. That meant this moisture was not coming from above. Only one direction left. From below. That confirmed it. The system was already reacting. Faster than I expected. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked toward my truck. No rush. No panic. Just timing. I started the engine but did not pull away immediately. I watched the garage door for a second longer. It was open now. Inviting. Ready to be used. That was the problem. They would keep using it. Every time they did, the pressure would build. The system would keep pushing against that seal. And eventually, something would give. But I was not going to wait for failure. That is not how this works. This had already crossed into something bigger than inconvenience. Bigger than access. This was now a code issue. A county issue. A compliance issue. And those moved differently. I pulled out onto the road and headed toward town again. Same direction as yesterday. Same building. But this time, I was not just verifying. I was initiating. The smell of paper and stale air hit me again as I stepped inside. Familiar now. Predictable. I went straight to the counter. No hesitation. I need to file a compliance review, I said. The clerk looked up, then nodded slowly. Property address? I gave it. She typed it in, eyes scanning the screen. Then she paused. Just for a second. That pause mattered. This one already has a recent permit, she said. I nodded. I know. I slid the printed documents across the counter. It is missing a required clearance. She looked down at the papers. Then back at the screen. The silence stretched a little longer this time. Something was not lining up on her end either. She clicked a few more times. Then her posture changed slightly. Straighter. More alert. That is when you know the system is starting to wake up. She reached for another form, pulling it closer. I will need to escalate this for review, she said. Calm. Professional. But different now. I nodded once and stepped back. That was all it needed. No arguments. No pressure. Just the right trigger in the right place. I turned and walked toward the exit, the hum of the building fading behind me. Outside, the air felt sharper again. Cleaner. Like something had shifted into motion. I got back into my truck and sat there for a second, hands resting on the wheel. Quiet. Still. But not for long. Because once the review starts, it does not stop halfway. I did not go back right away. I gave it time. Systems like this need space to start moving. By late afternoon, the air had shifted. You could feel it before you saw anything. I pulled up slowly and stopped at the edge of the road. The garage door was closed this time. No cars inside. No movement. That felt different. I stepped out and listened. The usual quiet was still there, but something underneath it had changed. A faint pressure. Hard to explain. But real. I walked toward the slab again, slower than before. The sunlight hit the surface at a lower angle now, revealing more texture. That slight slope looked sharper. More defined. Not fixed. Not corrected. Still wrong. I crouched near the metal cap and checked the edge again. The damp line had spread further. Still thin. Still subtle. But no longer contained to one spot. It was moving outward. That should not happen without a source. And there was no rain. I tapped the surface lightly with my knuckle. The sound came back duller this time. Less hollow. More pressure underneath. That told me the system was filling. Slowly. Quietly. I stood up and took a step back. This was earlier than I expected. Not failure. Not yet. But progression. I glanced toward Victoria's house. The front door opened right on cue. She stepped out, no coffee this time. No relaxed posture. Just a tight grip on her phone and a quick scan of the driveway. She saw me. Of course she did. Her eyes dropped to the slab for a second. Then back to me. That hesitation was new. She walked down the path, faster than before. "What did you do?" she asked. No greeting. No smile. Straight to accusation. I shook my head once. Nothing. That answer frustrated her more than anything else could have. "Something is wrong," she said, gesturing toward the garage. Her voice was sharper now. Less controlled. I looked at the slab again, then back at her. It was already wrong. She exhaled hard, like she was trying to push that answer away. "It passed inspection," she snapped. That word again. Passed. Temporary. Surface level. I let a second pass before I responded. That inspection did not include what is under it. She did not reply right away. Just looked at the ground again. This time longer. She was starting to see it. Not understand it. But feel it. That is how it begins. The ground does not lie. She stepped closer to the garage and pressed the remote. The door hummed and started to lift. Halfway up, it paused for a second. Just a slight hesitation. Then continued. Most people would ignore that. She did not. She pressed the button again, watching closely as it reached the top. That pause mattered. Systems under pressure affect everything above them. Even if it is small at first. She walked inside the garage, scanning the floor. I stayed where I was. No need to follow. A moment later, she stepped back out. "It is fine," she said, but her voice did not match the words. There was something else in it now. Uncertainty. I nodded slowly. "For now." That landed harder than I expected. She looked at me again, searching for something. An explanation. A solution. Control. But I did not give her any of it. Not yet. Because this was no longer about what I said. It was about what the system would show her next. A low sound came from beneath the slab. Not loud. Just a faint shift. Like something adjusting under pressure. Her eyes dropped instantly. She heard it too. That was the moment. The exact point where certainty breaks. She took a small step back from the garage. Not dramatic. Just instinct. That told me everything. She was starting to understand that this was not surface level anymore. This was deeper. And deeper problems do not respond to quick fixes. I turned slightly and looked down at the metal cap again. A thin bead of water had formed along the edge. Clear. Steady. It was no longer hiding. I did not point it out. I did not need to. She would see it soon enough. The air between us felt tighter now. No more easy confidence. No more rehearsed answers. Just quiet tension building in the space where control used to be. I took a step back toward my truck, giving the scene distance. Because from here on out, it was not about confrontation. It was about timing. And timing was already working in my favor. I reached the door and paused for a second, glancing back one last time. She was still standing there, staring at the slab, phone in hand, unsure who to call first. That hesitation was the real signal. The system had started responding. And she was just beginning to notice it. By the next morning, the ground had started telling the truth. The concrete looked the same at first glance. Smooth. Clean. Solid. But the edges gave it away. That thin line of moisture had widened into a faint dark ring along the base. Still subtle. Still easy to ignore. Unless you knew what it meant. I stepped out of my truck and felt it immediately. The air was cooler near the slab. Damp. Not from rain. From pressure building underneath. I walked closer, boots slowing as the gravel turned to packed dirt. Every step felt measured. Intentional. The garage door was halfway open this time. Not fully raised. Not fully closed. Just hanging there like it could not decide where it belonged. That was new. I stopped a few feet away and watched. No movement. No sound from the motor. Just stillness. That kind of hesitation does not come from the door itself. It comes from what is shifting below. I crouched again near the metal cap. The water was no longer just a bead. It had formed a small, steady seep around the edge. Clear. Cold. It traced a thin path along the concrete, searching for a way out. That path did not exist anymore. They had sealed it. I ran my finger through the moisture. Smooth flow. Consistent. That meant the line underneath was active. Still carrying runoff. Still doing its job. Just not able to release it properly. I stood up and stepped back, scanning the slab again. A faint hairline crack had formed near the corner. Not wide. Not dramatic. But new. It had not been there yesterday. That was fast. Faster than most people would expect. I looked toward Victoria's house. The front door was already open. She stepped out before I could even move. No coffee. No phone this time. Just urgency. She walked straight toward the garage, eyes locked on the ground. She saw it now. Fully. No more guessing. She stopped near the edge and stared at the damp line spreading outward. Her jaw tightened. That calm composure was gone. "It is leaking," she said, almost to herself. Not a question. A realization. I stayed quiet for a second. Let her sit with it. Then I said, "It is trying to move." She looked up at me, sharp, searching. "Fix it," she said. Not asked. Said. Like this was still something she could direct. I shook my head slowly. You cannot fix what you covered. That hit harder than anything before. She turned back to the slab, scanning it like she could will it back into place. The garage door made a low clicking sound behind her. A small mechanical adjustment. Then silence again. She glanced over her shoulder at it, uneasy. That hesitation in the system was spreading. Not just below. Above too. She stepped inside the garage, careful now. Watching where she placed her feet. The concrete floor inside looked fine. No visible damage. But that was the trap. Surface hides everything. She reached for the wall and pressed the door control again. The motor hummed. The door tried to move. It lifted a few inches. Then stopped. A sharper pause this time. Not smooth. Not normal. She pressed it again. Same result. That is when it shifted from inconvenience to problem. She stepped back out quickly, like distance might help. It does not. Not with systems like this. I walked a little closer, still keeping space between us. You blocked the flow, I said. Now it is pushing back. She did not respond. Just stared at the ground as another thin line of water traced its way along the edge. Slightly faster now. Slightly stronger. Still quiet. Still controlled. But building. A car slowed down on the road behind me. Someone watching. That always happens when something looks almost normal but feels wrong. They do not understand it. But they feel it. Victoria finally turned to me again. The confidence was gone. Replaced by something tighter. "What do we do?" she asked. The word we hung there. Too late for that. I looked at the slab one more time. At the crack. At the seep. At the slight tilt that had started all of this. Then back at her. Now you wait, I said. Because at this point, the system was already deciding the next move. By midday, the driveway was no longer pretending to be normal. The damp line had turned into a shallow sheen, spreading across the concrete like it was searching for an exit that did not exist. The sunlight caught it now. Reflected it. Made it impossible to ignore. I stood at the edge of the road again, watching the surface shift in small, quiet ways. No cracks breaking. Open. No dramatic failure. Just pressure building under something that was never meant to hold it. That is how these systems respond. Slow. Relentless. I walked closer and noticed the air felt heavier near the slab. Cooler. Damp. The smell had changed too. Less like fresh concrete. More like earth and trapped water. That shift always comes before visible movement. I crouched near the edge again. The seep had formed a thin stream now. Still controlled. Still steady. But no longer contained. It traced a path along the lowest point of the slab. Exactly where the slope forced it to go. That slope was doing its job now. Just not the one they intended. I stood up and scanned the garage door. Still half open. Still stuck in that uncertain position. It had not moved since morning. That told me the internal system was compensating. Trying to adjust to something it was not designed for. I heard a car approach behind me. This time it did not pass. It stopped. A second neighbor stepped out. Younger. Curious. He looked at the driveway, then at me. Something leaking, he asked. I shook my head slightly. Something blocked. That answer made him pause. He looked back at the water spreading across the surface. Then at the garage. Then back at me. That is not good, he said quietly. I nodded once. He did not stay long. Just long enough to understand that this was not a small issue. People sense it when something is off at a structural level. They may not know the cause. But they recognize the pattern. I turned back toward the house. Victoria was already outside again. This time pacing. Short, tight movements across her front yard. Phone pressed to her ear. Talking fast. Too fast. That tone never means control. It means reaction. I could not hear the words. But I could see the shift. The posture. The urgency. She ended the call and looked toward the garage again. Then toward me. That look was different now. Not confident. Not confrontational. Searching. Measuring. Trying to understand how far this had already gone. I walked closer, stopping a few feet from the edge of the slab. Who did you call? I asked. She hesitated. Just for a second. Contractor, she said. That made sense. First instinct. Fix the surface. Repair the visible issue. But that would not work here. I nodded slightly. They cannot fix this from above. She exhaled sharply. Frustration rising now. Then who? She asked. That question carried more weight than she realized. It was no longer about control. It was about jurisdiction. I looked at the water spreading across the concrete. Then back at her. The county, I said. The words landed heavy. She went still for a moment. Completely still. Then her eyes shifted toward the road. Like she was expecting something. Or someone. That instinct was correct. A white vehicle turned onto the street a few seconds later. Not fast. Not urgent. Just steady. Official. It slowed as it approached the driveway. The logo on the side was small but clear. County inspection. The truck rolled to a stop and idled for a moment. Engine humming low. The door did not open right away. That pause mattered. That is the moment when everything transitions from private problem to public issue. Victoria saw it. I saw it. The neighbors watching from a distance saw it too. The system had caught up. The driver finally stepped out, clipboard in hand, scanning the scene before saying a word. He looked at the water first. Then the slab. Then the garage. Slow. Methodical. That kind of inspection does not miss much. Victoria stepped forward quickly, trying to meet him halfway. Trying to control the narrative before it formed on its own. But it was already too late for that. He had seen enough in the first few seconds. And once that happens, the process does not slow down. It only moves forward. The inspector did not speak right away. He stepped closer to the slab, boots stopping just short of the water line. His eyes moved slowly. From the seep. To the crack. To the slight slope that pulled everything toward the blocked edge. That silence stretched longer than most people could handle. Victoria tried anyway. There has to be some mistake, she said, voice tight but controlled. He did not answer her. Not yet. He crouched down instead, pressing 2 fingers lightly against the damp surface. Then he looked at the metal cap. That small detail changed his expression. Not dramatic. Just sharper. More focused. He stood up and turned slightly, scanning the garage structure again. When was this poured? He asked. Simple question. No emotion. Victoria answered quickly. 2 days ago. He nodded once, writing something down on the clipboard. That note mattered. Timing always matters. He walked a slow circle around the slab, stopping at the corner where the crack had formed. He did not touch it. Just observed. That is how trained eyes work. They do not need to test everything. They recognize patterns. He glanced toward me briefly. Not long. Just enough to acknowledge presence. Then back to the structure. Victoria stepped closer, trying again. It passed inspection, she said. Same line. Less confidence. He finally looked at her directly. Initial permit review is not the same as a final clearance, he replied. Calm. Flat. That distinction landed harder than anything else so far. She blinked, processing it. He continued walking, stopping near the garage opening. The door was still stuck halfway. He watched it for a second. Then looked back at the ground. You have active water movement under a sealed structure, he said. Each word precise. No exaggeration. Just fact. The air shifted again. That sentence changed the situation completely. Victoria's posture tightened. Can it be fixed? She asked. That question came faster this time. Urgent. He paused before answering. Not for effect. For accuracy. Not without exposing what is underneath, he said. That answer removed every easy option. No quick repair. No surface patch. No shortcut. Victoria stepped back slightly, eyes moving between the slab and the garage door. We followed the plans, she said. He nodded once. The plans did not account for what is below. Same conclusion. Different voice. That made it official. He walked back toward his truck, reaching inside for a small marker and a notice form. The sound of paper sliding against metal echoed louder than it should have. Small sounds feel bigger when something shifts like this. He returned to the slab and placed the marker near the edge. Bright. Visible. Impossible to ignore. Then he started filling out the notice. Clipboard steady. Movements precise. Victoria watched every second of it. Not interrupting now. Just absorbing. That is the moment people realize they are no longer directing the outcome. The system is. He finished writing and tore the page cleanly. No hesitation. He stepped toward the garage opening and taped the notice to the frame. Flat against the surface. Secure. Final. The paper moved slightly in the breeze. But it stayed in place. This structure is under review, he said. Clear. Official. No use permitted until clearance is resolved. That line changed everything. The garage was no longer an asset. It was a liability. Victoria's eyes fixed on the notice. We just built this, she said quietly. He nodded once. Then you will want to address it quickly. No sympathy. No judgment. Just process. He stepped back, giving the structure one last look. Then turned toward his truck. The engine started with a low hum. Steady. Routine. Like this was just another stop on his route. But for us, it was the turning point. The truck pulled away slowly, leaving the scene quieter than before. Too quiet. Victoria stood there, staring at the notice, hands at her sides. No phone. No plan. Just the reality settling in. I stayed near the edge of the road, watching the garage in that new light. Same structure. Same concrete. Completely different meaning. The water still moved along the edge. Slow. Steady. Unstoppable. And now, officially, it could not be ignored. The notice stayed on the garage like it had always belonged there. Bright. Unavoidable. The kind of paper that changes how people see a structure overnight. Victoria did not move for a while. She just stood there, staring at it, like if she looked long enough it might disappear. It did not. The water kept moving along the edge, slow and steady, catching the light now in a way it had not before. Even the smallest reflection made it harder to ignore. I stepped closer, stopping at the same distance I had kept all morning. Close enough to see everything. Far enough to stay out of it. She finally turned to me, not with anger this time, but with something else. Calculation. You knew this would happen, she said. Not a question. A realization. I did not answer right away. I let the silence sit between us. Then I said, I knew what was under it. That difference mattered. She exhaled slowly, eyes dropping back to the slab. The crack had spread just a fraction more. Still small. Still controlled. But no longer isolated. It had started branching. That is how pressure finds its way out. Not all at once. Piece by piece. They can fix it, she said, quieter now. Less certain. I shook my head once. They cannot fix what is still active underneath. She looked at me again, sharper this time. Then what happens? That question carried weight now. Real weight. Not hypothetical. I glanced at the notice on the garage. Then at the water. Then back at her. They will have to open it, I said. Simple. Direct. She went still again. Completely still. That word hit harder than anything else so far. Open it. Not repair. Not adjust. Remove. Expose. That changes cost. Time. Control. Everything. A car slowed down on the road again. Another neighbor watching. This time they did not step out. They just looked. Long enough to understand something had shifted. Then they drove on. That is how it spreads. Quiet awareness. No announcement needed. Victoria turned back toward the garage and took a slow step inside, careful again, like the ground might respond to her movement. She looked at the floor. The walls. The door mechanism. Anything that still felt solid. But the sound under the slab had changed. Slight. Low. Like something adjusting deeper than before. She heard it. I saw it in the way her shoulders tightened. She stepped back out quickly. Distance again. Instinct again. This is not supposed to happen, she said. That sentence always comes when expectation meets reality. I nodded once. It was not supposed to be built there. That ended the argument before it started. She had nothing to counter that with. Not anymore. The approval was no longer enough. The notice had changed the frame. This was not about permission now. It was about compliance. And compliance does not negotiate. It enforces. She looked down at the metal cap near the edge. Really looked at it this time. Saw it. Understood what it meant. That moment was quiet. But it was the turning point. When you finally see the thing you ignored. The thing everything else depends on. How long? She asked. Her voice was lower now. Controlled in a different way. I took a second before answering. Not because I did not know. Because I wanted her to understand the answer. Not long, I said. The water traced another thin line across the concrete. Slightly wider now. Slightly faster. The system was not stopping. It was adapting. She followed the path with her eyes, watching where it moved, where it tried to go. There was nowhere left for it to escape cleanly. That is what happens when flow is forced into a closed space. It finds pressure instead. I stepped back toward my truck again, giving the scene room to unfold. No need to stay close. This part was no longer about me. It was about what came next. And what came next would not be quiet. I paused at the door and glanced back one more time. Victoria was still standing there, staring at the slab, the notice, the water. 3 separate things. All connected now. She had built over one line. But it touched everything. And now, it was starting to show. The next day did not start with noise. It started with absence. The garage door stayed closed. The driveway stayed empty. Even the usual morning sounds felt muted, like the entire space was holding its breath. I stepped outside and noticed it immediately. The water had spread further overnight. Not flooding. Not dramatic. Just enough to change the color of the concrete in a slow, steady pattern. The crack had widened too. Still narrow. Still controlled. But no longer subtle. You could trace it now without looking closely. That is when structures stop pretending. I walked closer, boots stopping just short of the damp edge. The air felt cooler again, heavier near the slab. That same smell of earth and trapped water lingered just beneath the surface. I listened. The faint movement below was stronger now. Not loud. Just more consistent. Like a system that had decided it was no longer going to wait. Victoria was already outside. Sitting on the front step this time. Not pacing. Not calling anyone. Just watching the garage like it might change on its own. Her posture was different. Shoulders lower. Movement slower. That shift always comes when the options run out. She looked up as I approached, but she did not stand. They came early, she said quietly. No greeting. No explanation. Just that. I nodded once. Who? She glanced toward the street. County engineer. Different from yesterday. That made sense. Inspection triggers review. Review brings in specialists. This was no longer surface level. I followed her line of sight. The tire marks were still visible near the road. Fresh. Heavy. Equipment had been here. Not for repair. For assessment. I looked back at the slab. Near the edge, faint chalk markings outlined a section around the metal cap. Clean lines. Measured. That was the next step. Define the area. Plan the exposure. I crouched near it again, tracing the chalk line with my eyes. About 3 feet wide. Centered directly over the access point. Exactly where it needed to be. No guesswork. That meant they had already confirmed it. Victoria watched me as I stood back up. They said it has to be opened, she added. The word sounded heavier now. Real. Final. I nodded slowly. It does. She looked down again, following the crack as it branched slightly further across the surface. They are coming back with equipment, she said. Today. That timeline was fast. But not surprising. Active drainage issues do not get delayed. I stepped back, giving the slab space again. The water had started to collect in a shallow pool near the lowest point. Still controlled. Still manageable. But growing. It would not stay that way. Victoria stood up slowly, brushing her hands against her jeans like she was trying to reset something that had already moved too far. They told me not to use it, she said, nodding toward the garage. That notice was still taped to the frame. Edges curling slightly now from the damp air. But still there. Still binding. I glanced at the garage door. Closed. Quiet. Useless. That structure had shifted from asset to restriction in less than 48 hours. They also said there could be more underneath, she added. That was the part she had not expected. It never stops at the first layer. I nodded once. There usually is. She looked at me again, longer this time. Not searching. Not challenging. Just trying to understand how far this went. I did not answer that part. Some things are better seen than explained. A low rumble echoed faintly from down the road. Distant. Mechanical. Growing slowly. We both turned at the same time. The sound was unmistakable. Not a car. Not a truck. Heavier. Slower. Purposeful. Victoria's eyes fixed on the road as the sound grew louder, rolling toward us in steady intervals. The ground under the slab seemed to respond to it. Subtle. But there. Like everything was aligning for what came next. She took a small step back from the driveway, instinct taking over again. Distance. Space. Time. But time was no longer hers to control. The rumble got closer. Clearer. And then the first piece of equipment turned the corner into view. The machine rolled in slow, heavy, deliberate. Tracks pressed into the gravel with a low crunch that echoed louder than it should have. The arm stayed still at first, tucked in like it was waiting for permission. The county engineer stepped out behind it, same calm posture, same measured pace. No rush. No hesitation. He walked straight to the chalk lines and stopped. Looked once at the slab. Once at the water. Then down at the metal cap buried under concrete that was never supposed to touch it. That was enough. He raised one hand slightly. A small signal. The operator inside the cab nodded and the engine tone shifted. Deeper now. Focused. The arm lifted slowly, metal joints moving with quiet precision. No sudden force. Just controlled motion. Victoria took another step back, arms folded tight across her chest. She did not say anything this time. There was nothing left to say. The first contact came soft. The edge of the bucket pressed against the marked section. A pause. Then a slow push. The concrete did not shatter. It resisted. Then gave just enough to show the line beneath it was never meant to hold. A thin fracture spread across the surface, connecting with the crack that had already formed. That was the release point. The second push came firmer. The section lifted. Slightly. Not broken apart. Just separated. The seal was gone. And the moment that happened, the system underneath responded. Water pushed up through the exposed edge. Not violently. Not out of control. Just steady. Like it had been waiting for that exact opening. The engineer stepped closer, watching the flow adjust instantly. He crouched and brushed away loose debris, revealing the access point fully. The metal cap was no longer hidden. It sat there, surrounded by disturbed concrete, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Move water. Relieve pressure. Maintain flow. He nodded once and stood back up. That was confirmation. No guesswork left. No doubt. The operator lifted the broken section aside and set it down carefully on the gravel. The garage did not move. It did not collapse. It just stood there, disconnected now from what had supported it. That is how real consequences show up. Quiet. Structural. Final. Victoria stared at the exposed ground, eyes fixed on the water moving freely again. The line it followed was clear now. Defined. It cut directly under the space where the garage floor had been sealed. There was no way to ignore it anymore. No way to argue around it. The engineer turned to her, voice calm, steady. This will need full removal over the affected area, he said. No hesitation. No alternatives. She nodded once, slow, like the weight of that sentence had finally settled in. The garage door behind them made a soft clicking sound as it tried to adjust again. It lifted an inch. Then stopped. Then dropped back into place. Even the mechanism knew it no longer had a stable base. I stayed where I was, near the road, watching the entire sequence unfold. Every detail lined up exactly how it should have. Not because I forced it. Because the system corrected itself once it had space to do so. The water continued to move, clearer now, faster, following its intended path without resistance. The pressure was gone. The problem was visible. And the solution was no longer optional. Victoria finally looked over at me. Not with anger. Not with blame. Just with understanding. The kind that comes too late to change anything. I nodded once. No words needed. The machine idled, waiting for the next instruction. The engineer checked his clipboard again, marking the next step in a process that was already set. This was no longer about a driveway. Or a garage. Or even a boundary. It was about what happens when something essential is ignored. Covered. Assumed away. The ground does not forget. It does not negotiate. It simply responds. And now, it had.